This presentation is on bridging gaps in education. My name is Jessica Johnson, and I'm presenting on behalf of Olivet Nazarene University. This presentation stems around the fact that there is a huge achievement gap in education when you're comparing minority students to their white peers. If you look in the upper right-hand corner of my first screen, it says that the average reading and math scores, and they're comparing white students versus African American students. So the white students, as you can see, as they progress over the years, 4th grade, 8th grade, and 12th grade, are consistently scoring higher than their African American peers. So this achievement gap is not something that exists in one grade and disappears in the next grade. It's something that travels with students as they travel through the education system. So some of the other contributing factors statistically, if you're looking at the statistics on the left, it says that African American, Indian, and Hispanic students are more likely to receive out-of-school suspensions compared to their white counterparts. So those students are not receiving instructional time when their white counterparts are, which is for sure contributing to this achievement gap. In the bottom right-hand corner, it's also discussing how parents' education factors into the children and their scores. So by 2022, the number of Hispanic students in public elementary and secondary schools is projected to grow 33%. So the number of multiracial students as a whole is expected to grow 44% by 2022. So as the percentage of our white students shrinks and the percentage of our students of minorities grow, the U.S. is left with an education system that just does not serve the majority of its students properly. So these gaps that already exist are proving to become more problematic. And the gap is just going to continue to grow as our education system doesn't service these students. So I was able to sit down and interview the principal of my school, which is primarily Latino and Hispanic students. We're about 98% Latino and Hispanic students. My principal's name is Javier Ariola Lopez, Mr. Ariola. And our school is a bilingual pre-K through 8th elementary school, serving primarily ESL and low-income students within Chicago public schools. So what's being done to close the achievement gap is the first question that I asked him. So he said the one thing he really tries for is promoting equity as a mindset. So he says when you look at our school on paper, it looks like the odds are against us. We're serving low income, high poverty, single parents, high ESL count, high minority students. But these are things that we can't control. And when our students come to us, we can't use that as an excuse. So he said his goal is to empower teachers, that we should not be looking at it like this, but we need to have them come in and set these high expectations. So if you're looking at this next slide, it says, what's being done to close the achievement gap? So he says, teachers need to be improving their practice, receiving a lot of professional development that caters to the students and the demographic that we serve. So whether that means encouraging teachers to get their ESL endorsement or providing students with additional help that they need. Maybe they need pulled for those ESL services, or maybe they need to be recommended for an IEP or something like that. So making sure that these low-performing students are getting the services they need so that the gap can be closed. I also looked at a video of an interview with Nadia Lopez. She's a principal of a primarily African-American population school in Brooklyn, New York. So she said she sees this achievement gap as a large part because children of color just don't see themselves represented in industries such as science, engineering, technology. So these minority students at this point are at a disadvantage because they just don't feel inspired to reach for these goals that a lot of their white peers are being represented in. So they're just made out to believe that they're not going to achieve as much. And then she said it just becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So what is being done to close the achievement gap? So One thing that the research that I did stated was that closing the achievement gap needs to become a priority as a school district. So I work for Chicago Public Schools, and we do a pretty good job of making sure that our at-risk students and our minority students are receiving supports that they need, whether it be creating opportunities for homeless students to make sure they're safe and fed, the most basic hierarchy of needs. And it stretches up to engaging teachers and making sure their curriculum is strong. You're setting high expectations, decreasing class sizes, involving teachers in the design of their professional development. So where do they need developed? And then strategically design the professional development around those things that they say they need. A lot of the research surrounded creating a climate of high expectations and providing help for those low-income and at-risk students. So even though the achievement gap is big and it's a huge problem in our education system today, the future is bright, and while the gap still exists, obviously, data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress points to a narrowing of the achievement gap for African American and Hispanic students. So, for example, African American and Hispanic students are 3 years ahead in math compared to the previous generation. These same students are 2 to 3 years ahead in reading skills compared to the previous generation. And these students' scores have substantially improved compared to the scores of white students. So the future is bright. If we are working together, we can make a change, and we can advocate for equity in education for students, no matter of their race, and especially making sure to service our minority students so that they can achieve all that they're potentially could offer.